I am good at not watching movies that are bad.
This time we watched Season 12, Episode 4, The Day Time Ended.
Named so because the original title, Time Warp, was apparently too challenging for audiences.
It's too cerebral, that one. That and Vortex. But first, follow-up in the form of a tiny bit of news for your hair.
You might remember that our last episode on Cosmic Princess featured a few scenes of Crow cutting Joel's hair. We posted a still from one of these scenes on Megaphonic's Instagram account, and we got a comment from user Throwing Toasters that said, Crow cutting hair is one of the best pieces of puppetry on the show ever.
It turns out that Throwing Toasters isn't the name for that old screensaver. It is none other than Grant Bachoco, the puppeteer who performs Crow and M. Waverly on the new series of MST3K.
Yeah, and we're happy to agree with him. That was a surprisingly sophisticated bit of puppetry for very, very early in the series.
Indeed, it was so sophisticated that they redid it in Season 1 at some point.
They did do that quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I hear, Adam, that you've been moonlighting again.
Yes, it's time. It's time to roar out with your whore out for podcast whoring, as I have made 2 podcast appearances discussing little scene movies. On the Fiasco Brothers Watch a Movie, aka Dial T for Fiasco, I discussed one of the best movies ever made, Brother from Another Planet, which features a show-stopping Joe Morton performance and was written and directed by John Sayles. That's a terrific film, and we'll have a link to that in the show notes. But I also discussed one of the worst movies ever made, a little nugget called Lawnmower Man 2 Beyond Cyberspace.
Was the original Lawnmower Man the one with the CGI?
Yes, this one doesn't have CGI, but it does have Matt Frewer on a wire, so that's not too bad. That was for another podcast called The Trash Canon, which is focused on just that. Which of the trashiest films can you put into a kind of self-regulated canon of the best of the worst?
Love it.
So yeah, if you want to see what happens when someone uses science fiction tropes to tell a sophisticated story about race, or you want to see Matt Frewer in a yellow jumpsuit as though he's dressed like Elvis on the 50,000 Elvis Fans Can't Be Wrong record album, then yeah, one, if not both of those podcasts are for you. We'll have links in our show notes to both.
Should we start digging into our own trash canon right now?
All right, let's look through every abandoned spaceship and try to find something to say about this ungodly mess. This time we watched Season 12, Episode 4, The Day Time Ended. As the elderly Grant and his son Richard drive away to a secluded getaway, the radio announces that some kind of supernova, a simultaneous explosion of 3 stars, is a-happening. This is the closest we'll get to an explanation for the baffling doings that befall Grant and his family over the next 79 minutes. Once all 5 family members arrive at a solar-powered house they'll all be living in, things start glowing green at random points, and for Grant's granddaughter, Jenny, appliances will turn on by themselves. Why, that sounds like a time warp to me. What else is there? Let's see. Grant's granddaughter is visited by a tiny stop-motion creature that foreshadows producer Charles Band's love of tiny imps for films like Troll, Puppet Master, and Ghoulies. So this is a movie about friendly aliens, right? A real Mac and Me where Jenny befriends a spaced invader who hides from her parents and she has to help him, right? Nope. A bunch of Super Famicoms with laser guns shoot up her bedroom before going on to attack the family. The little gremlin is never seen again. The family tries to leave, but Jenny disappears and reappears, which is the closest thing this movie has to a theme. Big stop-motion creatures duke it out by the house when Grant's car won't start. Oh, so this must be a horror movie, and these terrifying monsters won't stop killing humans and each other until they find a baby creature, which we saw Jenny playing with earlier, right? Nope. Now the family's jumping through time and space and are getting split up in different dimensions. Are they to encounter aliens masquerading as gods? A mad scientist meddling with time travel? Are Grant and his family just action figures that think they're alive? Is The Day Time Ended a cookbook? Nope. Grant is comforted by the fact that it's a garden variety time warp and is soon reunited with the members of his family who went missing. The movie doesn't end so much as it stops to ask for directions, only to get eaten by coyotes.
And now, the episode. In the opening, Jonah is trying to get Tom and Crow to be a bit more subtle about their plans, and they amscrade just in time for Max to stop by, seeking assurance that the tools the Mads have given Jonah won't be used for an ironic comeuppance. Back from the intro theme, Jonah and the Bots are midway through the gauntlet, and are starting to feel a little exhausted. They turn to that classic drug of choice of capitalist society, coffee. For the invention exchange, the SOL crew finds some more palatable alternatives to the legendarily bland and stale fortune cookie. Some ideas include fortune fried rice and a
Peking Magic 8-Ball.
Ah, here you
Delicious.
As per usual, Max and Kinga's invention has a much more malevolent undertone. In this case, a condiment application system that sprays mustard gas. Also, there's apparently a new character, a talking dog named Bonesy. Sometimes you miss stuff when you watch episodes out of order. In the next segment, Jonah and the Bots all imitate the silver-haired patriarch of the movie by barbecuing a giant steak while discussing the various highly manly and virile ways they plan to die. They then demonstrate their red-bloodedness by taking on a pair of marauding bikers, in this case, Growler and Waverly. With 30 minutes to go in the episode, Jonah and Crow are attempting to put together a riveting, entirely coherent sci-fi script when they are interrupted by Tom Servo doing a spot-on Professor Harold Hill. In this impressive homage to the Music Man, Professor Tom convinces the hapless script doctors to abandon their plans of a 3-act structure and predictable hero's journey in favor of concepts. In the final segment, the SOL crew is starting to feel some deep hurting, to the point where the Bots are starting to hallucinate a utopic domed city similar to the final matte painting in the movie. Max and Kinga are rubbing their hands in triumph when they are interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Forrester's old spaceship, the Pretty Lady. Side note to veteran fans, no, Trace Bilyeu's character never had a spaceship. This is some fun revisionism. And who's inside? Why, look at that, an unirritating cameo. In this case, Dr. Lawrence Earhart, played by J. Elvis Weinstein. He's dropped the squeaky voice for a Bing Crosby-like croon, but is still wearing an ill-fitting lab suit. He's come by to drop off the ashes of Forrester and TV's Frank, and he's looking for a copy of the classic Pod People song, Idiot Control Now, to complete the ceremony. He also mentions in passing that Kinga's mother is Kim Cattrall, so there you go.
For shame, I cannot abide any such declarations of war on the taste sensation that is the fortune cookie. It is equal parts confectionery and toy. It's the original Kinder Egg, if instead of like a little action figure of Sylvester the cat that falls apart in 5 seconds, it's a Zen cone.
I suppose so. And the fact that they're not actually fortunes anymore, they're just like mildly pleasant aphorisms. I can do without.
The last fortune cookie that I opened just had the words heart disease written on it.
What? Oh no.
So I don't know if that's a prediction or if it's just that's what I should be calling myself online. As a breaker of hearts and giver of disease.
Speaking of which, it kind of sounds like this movie gave you a bit of heart disease, Adam.
Well, I had a really peculiar reaction to this. This is your first time watching this episode, correct?
Yes.
And I'd seen it before because I decided I inexplicably binged several episodes. I kind of went through episodes 2 through 4 in kind of one fell swoop.
Oh, the Gauntlet got you.
Yeah, I was intrigued because I had heard a rumor that turned out to be true, which is that Dr. Earhart was coming back.
Mm.
And so I was curious to see that. When was that going to happen? And when I watched this episode originally, I really enjoyed it. And then upon rewatch, I hated it.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I've had a complete 180 on this episode. I'm struggling to remember what I liked about it that wasn't like stuff that's in the movie. I found a lot of the riffs to be really irritating, especially the many, many callbacks to Hollaback Girl, which wasn't funny the first time, but they keep dragging it out there. Calls about pizza, imitating a horse, imitating what the grandfather would sound like if he narrated what he did with all of his limbs while driving a car. It's like stuff like this where it's like, did I find any of this funny the first time? Was I like just kind of like on a feverish dream of just devouring these new episodes like sugar or what? I don't know. I didn't see anything there, and I was not a fan of the concept song. So sorry everybody, but everything you like, I don't.
Yeah, I think we're on very opposite teams here. I thought this was one of the best episodes I've seen of the new. In fact, I think it's been my favorite so far.
Oh,
it
wow.
is so much fun. I agree the Hollaback Girl wasn't the greatest joke, but I liked the joke about the pizza. I can see where you can see like it's kind of a tired joke, but they just kept coming back to it in a way that built on itself. And I found the movie really fun to watch. I found the riffs really great. That song was amazing and really broke down like what was going on here. How did they put together this completely incoherent plot and what was behind it? Well, yeah, probably just concepts. And I found the riffs to be really fun. I think my favorite part was during the climax of the vortex and little Jenny is stuck on the other side and it seems like we're about to lose her forever. And they just start a conversation about snacks for the little kid.
Right.
Maybe that's just because I'm a parent, but I'm just like, when they mentioned like Bonnie Bells, I'm like, oh my God.
Jenny, you getting hungry in the vortex?
I'm fine, Mom.
How about ants on a log?
I'm fine.
What about a rice cracker?
I'm good.
We got baby bells!
Mom, I'm not hungry.
I really think this is a good episode, especially for people who are not familiar with MST3K. I would treat this as a gateway episode.
Oh, that's weird because like the last 5 minutes are just a continuity wank. And that's the part of the episode I enjoyed the most, despite normally abhorring such things. But actually, I was thrilled to see Dr. Larry back. And I really liked a brand new take on him.
Mm-hmm.
The third, since he's different from KTMA to season 1 and is different yet again.
I've never liked the character, and this is probably the most I've enjoyed the character, probably because he's not a 17-year-old kid anymore.
That's true, although I think you'll find there's some real treasures of KTMA era Dr. Larry.
Oh, you say so, huh?
Uh-huh. Oh, man, it gets great. Whereas season 1 Dr. Larry, that's hard going.
I think this is the kind of movie that is personally a good one for me. I seem to just have a soft spot for 70s sci-fi movies, but I also like that the stakes are relatively low. There's a lot of fun concepts. Like there's just a lot for them to play with, and I really think they step up to the plate with it really well.
I don't think the riffs do, but I do enjoy the movie. I really like something in this movie that is almost commented on in the riffing as if it's a detriment, but I like it, which is that the heroes of the film are an old couple. And you don't get that. And I like that there's nothing about how they are both too old for this shit. There's nothing about how their bodies are failing. There's nothing in which the fact that they're old is played up to potentially derive some sort of suspense or doubt about whether or not they're going to survive their encounters. They're shown as capable. They just happen to be 60 plus.
Yeah. No, I really liked that unusual choice for like the leading protagonist here. But he also fits of a kind of character you did see a lot in the 70s, like the very, very capable patriarch, right?
I think the movie is playing with that. I think what the movie is doing is showing the, reliable grandfather, like the patriarch of the family, but is showing him when he's in over his head and trying his best, which I think is like the most interesting parts of the movie, is him just being baffled and upstage. Like there's a moment in which he tries to get everybody out of there by car when things are first starting to get weird, and he's unable to start the car, and it's only Jenny who calls off the aliens or monsters or whatever's whatever's causing the interference to stop it. And he's just like, I don't know what's going on. He just tries to do his best. So I think that like there's an interesting, not subversion, but playing with that.
That's another thing about this movie is all the actors are pretty capable, even the young girl.
Yeah, they're all solid.
In fact, I'd say the one who's maybe the most dull is Chris Mitchum, who is the son of renowned Hollywood good looker Robert Mitchum.
Here's the thing, is that he is the inverse of on-screen presence that Robert Mitchum is. Robert Mitchum's one of the all-time greats. It reminds me, though Francis Ford Coppola was never an actor, it reminds me of seeing Sofia Coppola in Godfather 3, in which she gets shot and she has to say one thing, and it's a thing that myself and my friend Heather still laugh about, which is just when she turns to the camera and says, "Dad," and totally dies. Godfather 3 really sucks. Its reputation precedes it, but it's 100% true. It's really quite bad.
It was interesting to see, first of all, an elderly man, but also a family man in this role, because it's not really family men you get in the 70s, it's disaffected loners. And that's what really struck me about this movie, because it seemed like an almost direct response to another hit sci-fi movie of the 70s, Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Now, much like your aversion to bad movies, I have an aversion to Steven Spielberg movies, which are bad to me. So I haven't watched it yet.
So you've never seen it?
No.
It's worth it just for the special effects that have definitely held up.
Is there a particular version I should watch, given that there's 3 of them floating around out there?
Oh, I don't know. I don't get that nerdy. But I mean, you're probably familiar with it. I'll give you a quick summary. This man who's just like he's a line operator. He sees some aliens come by and he becomes absolutely obsessed with them, to the point where he has dreams about this weird, I think it's called Devil's Rock. And he ends up basically alienating his entire family to track down these dreams and visions. And he finally meets them in this really, I still think, amazing sequence where these like godlike aliens come down for like first contact, and he goes away with them. He's going to be like the human ambassador, and that's the end of the movie. And what's really interesting about that is there's not even a glint of remorse that he's left his family behind. And Spielberg wrote this when he was still single, and he says that he would never have written it quite that way again once he had children. He's like, I did a lot of growing up since then. That's
the most fantastical part to me, Beth. You mean that you would spend time with your family instead of hanging out with cool aliens?
Well, that's just it. What he is choosing, on one hand, it looks really, really adventurous, and you're going to do something extra human, something that no other human has done before, which, yeah, obviously is more interesting than like a dull and boring family. But, I mean, then you're the only human. Like, it's also kind of like the embodiment of absolute loneliness to be the only human surrounded by these completely aliens in the middle of, like, the darkness of the universe. And that's the life you're choosing. It's the ultimate loneliness.
Plus, there's nothing to say that the aliens are in and of themselves interesting, I suppose, because if we don't see inside the spaceship, I mean, if the camera lingered on, we would just see Richard Dreyfuss go inside, and then there'd just be a bunch of aliens and sweaty wife beaters going, "We make boxes."
Right. So the fact that something similar is happening here, where the protagonists meet these advanced creatures that are kind of beckoning them into this super evolution of their hearts and minds in a way that is kind of like 2001, but it's the whole family. They all get to do it together.
It's the ultimate adventure. Family and increased awareness of the world and your place in it. Well, here's the thing. There's that line that I only caught on rewatch about the supernova.
My car's talking again.
A binary supernova, a simultaneous explosion of 3 giant stars located in the center of
Hey,
our
we better
galaxy.
get a move.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems to be the explanation for why things are weird, I guess, in certain areas.
Right.
And all right, that's the flimsy pretext for the movie. Sure. But did you ever get a sense there was any kind of intelligence behind these creatures? I didn't. I saw a bunch of different... there was a little elf creature that danced for Jenny. There were a bunch of what could even have been machine intelligences, just ships that are unmanned. Mm-hmm. And then there's 2 giant creatures who, again, don't seem to have sophistication beyond that of, I don't know, a jaguar or a lizard.
I'm not going to give this movie any more credit than is due. But I should mention that lack of assuredness about the aliens and whether they were good or bad or smart or dumb, that's in Close Encounters as well, because the first thing that happens is this small child being abducted by these aliens. So there's until the very end, you have no sense of whether these are benevolent creatures or not. This is pulling on that same sense of ambiguity in order to kind of put off, the big reveal until the very last minute.
Yeah, 'cause, I mean, I'm honestly not sure if we're seeing things from like civilizations that have died out because of said supernovas, if that's just other creatures that the aliens at the very end are like harvesting for their bubble city. I don't know what's going on. So it's sort of hard to say. I always thought Close Encounters was a movie in which What About Bob became obsessed with potatoes.
That happens too.
I just thought it was more of a driving force in the narrative.
But yeah, I mean, that's what I was saying. Like, obviously, there's no way that these extremely differing ideas and special effects fit together in any conceivable way. But I guess they weren't meant to. They were just supposed to create a general feeling of what is going on until the very end. And to some extent, that's what Close Encounters does too.
Yeah, it reminds me, and there is a fun, I think it's Starlog. There's an interview with the special effects folks who made this. No, sorry, it's Famous Monsters of Filmland, issue 161 from 1980, in which the special effects guys who are responsible for the basic concept and the stop motion creatures talk about the different concepts and how it evolved into the day time ended. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that comes across is that the final script evolved into something like a live-action Twilight Zone,
right?
As how it's described, and that's definitely how it feels. But it feels like one of the worst Twilight Zones. It feels like it reminds me of the most of it's like the Odyssey of Flight 292 or whatever it's called, where an airplane keeps going back in time, and that's the premise of the story. It might be the Odyssey of Flight 93, but regardless, it keeps going back, and eventually they see a very crude dinosaur puppet, and the dinosaur puppet roars at them, and we cut back to the cockpit, and it's like, well, I guess we're going to go back in time until we all die, and then the credits rolled.
Awesome.
So it kind of reminds me of that. It's like, hey, it's a bunch of stuff, and we killed time, and we hope you enjoyed it. Buy something from our sponsor.
Well, this is the thing. Like, time travel seems to have nothing to do with time. Like, you could just as easily just make this a dimensional thing, you know? Yeah. The time travel does not seem to be the best way to kind of pull this all together.
It only plays with the concept once, which is when Richard leaves and then comes back and sees that Grant is still there and remarks, it's like, what are you doing here? I left seconds ago. And Grant's like, it was hours ago.
Yeah.
and that's like the one time they have any kind of fun with time travel, which is weird because if you had a story in which time and space got warped, so time and dimensions only are doing, we don't have any aliens, we don't have any kind of goings on, just time is messing up in this one confined area. You could have a lot of fun with that if you shot it creatively. You could have people in different time periods kind of like reacting to things that are about to occur, to things that have already occurred but that we haven't seen. Like, you could have done something with this concept that was like truer to the time travel angle, but I understand that the men who made this movie had no interest in that. They wanted to make a stop motion puppet movie.
Yeah, exactly.
By any means necessary.
But I will say, Adam, I know we've talked about this before and your dislike of Spielberg. And I seem to recall that your main problem with Spielberg is that he's very treacly and he tends to be heartwarming in a way that feels fake and unearned. This is probably the least trickly thing that Spielberg ever did.
What, even more than Duel or the Night Gallery pilot he directed?
Yeah, I would say, well, I haven't seen those, so I can't say. But it's like this, the hero of the movie abandons his family and does not evince one iota of regret.
I do like Richard Dreyfuss and people who abandon stuff. So I'm intrigued. That's it. On Beth's recommendation, I am doing a double bill of the theatrical cut of Close Encounters of the Third Kind and 1941, her favorite movie.
But you did mention that the production company has a little bit of a history. I gotta imagine that you know who this Charlie Band guy is, Adam.
Oh, I'm surprised that you don't remember the name from a little movie called Laser Blast.
I don't, but I did recognize what was it, Bud Carlos?
More on that in a bit.
Yeah. Did remember that one.
Again, hard name to forget. But yes, Charlie Band has been in the motion pictures business for a long time, and he's from an artistic family. For Lithuanian landscape artist Max Band begat filmmaker Albert Band, who begat Charles and Richard Band, and so on until the stars themselves are snuffed out. For the planet will be covered in bands. While I don't know actually that much about Max Band, I have seen films that Albert Band has worked on as either a producer or director, such as a little film called Dracula's Dog. Yeah, with a premise like that. I'm sure it was the Bunicula of 1976. But yes, Charles Band was essentially following in his father's footsteps in creating films, and the two of them worked together, of course, as the 70s and 80s progressed. The 70s kind of sees Charles Band go from an independent producer to a man with an empire, Empire Pictures to be precise.
Nice.
As he started off independently making movies like Laser Blast and this film, I found it interesting. The Daytime Ended was released by Compass International Pictures, and both it and Laser Blast were produced in part by Irwin Yablans. So it was weird to see these late 70s movies get distribution by a producer, Irwin Yablans, and Compass, his company, simply because Yablans produced Halloween and released it through Compass. It's like, genre pictures will make a lot of money. Let's release The Daytime Ended and Laser Blast. They'll make Halloween dollars, which is crazy. But Band eventually took over producing, and his best films are from this period, from the 1980s when he formed Empire. And it's when basically his most famous for being good movies come out, because this is where we get Reanimator and From Beyond and several other collaborations with Stuart Gordon. We get a little movie called Ghoulies, which you might think is perhaps the start of Band's obsession with tiny things that come after you. In this case, tiny monsters that will bite you if you sit on a toilet, leading to the slogan, Ghoulies, they'll get you in the end.
Perfect.
He also created the original Troll, which has nothing to do with Troll 2.
Right.
And he would perhaps cement his love of tiny things attacking people with Puppet Master.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, one of my personal favorites, a little time travel movie about, someone who's very good at killing, who is sent back into the past from the future to protect a woman. This little movie starts with T, Beth. Do you know what it is?
Total Recall?
Trancers.
Dang it.
The best movie called Trancers ever made. No, that's a delight. It stars a young Helen Hunt, and also features Leonard. It features Leonard from Community.
Really?
As one of three wise men, because Trancers is a Christmas movie. Charles Band stuff with Empire is really fun and really creative, and even though it's uneven, the worst Empire movies are not that bad. They're pretty fun. Like, the worst one is probably Troll, or maybe the original Ghoulies, as Ghoulies 2 is the superior Ghoulies film. Don't let anyone tell you different. But Charles Band was kind of terrible with money, which is why there is the fall of the Band empire. Because it seems like Charles Band would promise you that you would, I don't know, get paid. Mm-hmm. And then suddenly you wouldn't. And say what you will about Roger Corman.
Yeah, he had a tight ship budget-wise.
Yes, but everybody got paid, just not very much. Mm-hmm. But they got paid. Whereas Band seemingly wanted to put all the money on screen and have none left over, except potentially for himself. I think this probably explains why Charles Band has so many aliases, perhaps to avoid having to pay back creditors.
Yep.
This
move.
The following names are names in which Charles Band has worked under: James Amante, Robert Amante, Carlo Bocchino, Conrad R. Rains, Charlie Band, and Robert Talbot, which is the name of the character from the original Wolfman, which perhaps is a sign that he has been cursed to make low-budget movies. So, unsurprisingly, several producers, notably Brian Usna, who worked with him on Reanimator, sued him, and it took years to get their proper payment for films that they had made earlier. And Empire fell by the wayside. And because they were in such dire straits financially, this is why we have Troll 2, because Charles Band had to sell the rights to Troll.
Okay.
So it was just whoever wanted to buy the rights to Troll could make movies called Troll. So that's why we have Troll 2. And that's also why the Ghoulies series takes a sharp left turn in quality from Ghoulies 3 and 4. They lose the puppets between Ghoulies 3 and 4, so they're just dwarves in masks come the fourth film, which is quite sad.
Okay, but one of his aliases was not Richard Band, who was in fact his brother.
That's right. So we better huddle off somewhere to talk about not the family band, but the band family when we get to The Scorner. Now, does that name ring a bell to you, or did you assume that was just another alias for Charles Band?
I thought it was another alias.
yeah, it is perhaps a little more suspicious than Robert Amante. But no, Richard Band's a real guy. I can prove it. And indeed, he's probably the best thing to come out of the Full Moon / Empire stomping grounds outside of maybe director Stuart Gordon and actors Jeffrey Combs and Barbara Crampton. And I don't know, the Ghoulies. Because Richard Band is a solid composer who has done a ton of weird things. He started off not really interested in film music, and because the Band family traveled around everywhere, he apparently only had a love of classical music and flamenco. As the 60s went on, he started a band that was called Black Sun, and that was a name that all the bandmates hated. And none of them could think of a better one, but they knew they had to change it. So Richard, figuring himself to be the leader of the band, announced, "It's changed," the name. And when asked, it's like, what did the name change to? It's like, no. This is my great idea. The band is called It's Changed.
Almost as good as the Oneaters.
Yeah. And now, in fairness, he was 16 or 17 when he did that. So, and you know what? It's Changed must have had something, because Band's role as a rock and roll musician and his potential future as a rock and roll musician only ended because the rest of the Band family were moving to America. And he had a gig in Rome. It's Changed. It would have been It's Changed biggest gig because they were supposed to open for the Rolling Stones. But Richard Band moved to America and would instead score Charlie Band pictures for the rest of his life. So yeah, when it came time to do these smaller films, like even before the Empire days, let alone the Full Moon days, Richard Band wasn't even a composer then. Like, he was working on films that, his brother and his father Albert were doing, and working any kind of jobs as like a production manager, as a crew. And he eventually, just because he had knowledge of how to write music and an interest in classical music since he was a kid, fell into film scoring. And it was super hard on, at the very least, lower budget films, because you would sit down in those days with the director or the producer, or possibly both, just once, and they'd tell you where they'd need music, and someone with the job of music editor transcribed those scenes and the overall notes and how long that was, and you were just basically scoring scenes from memory, which is how he scored this film.
Okay.
Yeah. And so he only watched it once. And I have to say, especially knowing that, I think he did quite a good job. There's a weird sense of foreshadowing here in terms of what the Richard Band sound is, that his previous score for a film featured on this show, Laser Blast, which he did with Joel Goldsmith, you hear what Richard Band sounds like here, whereas you don't in Laser Blast.
Okay. All right. So that Laser Blast was not typical of his work.
No. It's almost entirely dominated by synths, and it's very monothematic, which I don't think of Richard Band at all, where you just hear that same plodding da 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 for all of Laser Blast.
That's right.
Yeah, if you've seen the movie once, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah, it's like the day time ended, while not his best score, is interesting and has lots of flavors that he would go back to, but most importantly shows off his, I think, variety, his ability to stretch himself musically. Like, I love, and you don't hear much of this in the movie, there's a track called Nova and Main Titles, which would be the opening credits of the movie, and there's a real foreboding quality to the music. There's tense strings and this kind of like mournful horns, and then it eventually segues into this really propulsive track with strings and oboe, and that doesn't quite get to the kind of excitement of an action cue, because it still retains that kind of like sad quality, but he's like jumping around and playing with speed and feeling for music, and as a result, like, despite the fact that he is asked to do a bunch of different things for the different tones of the different scenes throughout the many, many set pieces of the day time ended, the score, I think, packs a cohesiveness that the film lacks, because it constantly revisits this feeling of isolation or potential loneliness at the very least, which is scoring the feeling that the family must be experiencing of just how bewildered they are by all this stuff that's happening.
Yeah, I mean, what would you say is a particular moment that stood out for you?
It's probably the moment that's listed on the soundtrack as the Gremlin, which is when Jenny encounters this weird little stop motion imp who jumps around Mr. Be Natural style and then vanishes. But it's not just the best moment of the score, it's the most Richard Band part of the score as well. Like, it veers aggressively from suspense music to comedy music and then back again, because you're not supposed to know exactly what this creature represents or what's going on or what the spaceships that are coming into the scene towards the end mean. And he balances that all really well. Like, it's a 5-minute track that has plucked strings and then comical brass and piano, but then suddenly gets very suspenseful, and it shows what he would be doing throughout almost all of the 80s and some of the 90s as well, which is he would be balancing horror and humor in horror comedies like Reanimator and Ghoulies.
Right.
And I think that, like, in a weird way, even though the daytime ended, it's not the most memorable film that's been covered on this show, and it's not the highlight of Band's scoring career, but it shows what he could do. And I think that it was a good way for him to cut his teeth, because he would perfect this Richard Band sound later on. But I have to mention, before we wrap up on Richard Band, because I'll be plenty more to talk about when we get to Laser Blast, I have to mention my favorite thing that he did. When presented with Reanimator during the mid-'80s by Stuart Gordon, he didn't know how to score the film and thought the best way to score a horror comedy would be to look at how often the Psycho score by Bernard Herrmann was ripped off in horror movies, and far straighter horror movies from the time. Like the Friday the 13th score is notoriously just the Psycho score. And so he decided to recreate several pieces from the Psycho score, but add synths and 80s electronic drum beats and drum machines to it, and give it a super funky 80s vibe. And he always intended something to be in the opening credits, but it didn't get put in there, so he amended this so that's on the soundtrack album, is that it's the music credit of the film is supposed to read, "Music composed and conducted by Richard Band, with humble apologies to Bernard Herrmann."
Sweet of him to acknowledge that.
Hey, everybody, it's time for the Shallow 13.
Time may be doing crazy things, but time has come today for the Shallow 13. 13 time-saving notes on this episode of MST3K and its movie, The Day Time Ended. Go, Beth, go!
The Daytime ended up with a small but reasonably interesting cast. Dorothy Malone, who plays the family matriarch, had won a Best Supporting Actress Oscar for 1956's Written on the Wind. As we mentioned earlier, the father who wants to order pizza is Chris Mitchum, son of classic handsome actor Robert Mitchum. And his wife is played by Marcy Lafferty, who in real life was then the wife of William Shatner and was in the first Star Trek movie.
You know who's not in the first Star Trek movie? Garfield. For you have no idea how alone you are, Garfield, because Jim Davis is dead. Oh, not the cat cartoonist, but time ended for actor Jim Davis after 2 years following his role as Grandpa Grant in this movie. This is the final theatrical film for the Gruff Davis, who was in Jesse James Meets Frankenstein's Daughter and Alan J. Pakula's The Parallax View. He was a household name for his TV work thanks to his role as Jock Ewing on Dallas.
What treasures do we find amongst the graveyard when Gramps stumbles out of the house during a time warp? A couple of fighter jets, a piece of construction equipment, a space shuttle, a Yellow Rider rental truck, the fuselage of an old C-47, a Carrier Air Wing 6, and if the website Million Monkey Theater is to be believed, the moon buggy from Space 1999.
You may notice the framing's a little off during the driving scenes at the beginning of the film. The Daytime Ended was shot in Panavision 235, but it was matted and occasionally pan and scanned for MST3K's aspect ratio of 185. Unless you found a vintage 35mm print of The Daytime Ended in your local time warp, this episode is the closest you'll get to seeing the film as it was intended to be seen. All VHS and DVD issues of the film are pan and scan for the pre-widescreen era, presenting an image of 133.
If you're a fan of Season 5's Outlaw of Gore, and why wouldn't you be, this bud's for you. Director John Bud Cardos helmed that cinematic ode to Jack Palance and Buffalo Shots in 1988. Now get out of here, you disgusting worm!
Not so fast. We've got one more Bud bite. This man is for the birds. John Bud Cardos got his start in the industry thanks to Alfred Hitchcock. The master of suspense employed Bud as head bird wrangler on 1960's The Birds. Presumably, not all of the birds survived, as Bud would later supply stuffed birdies for Norman Bates in 1963's Psycho.
And let's not forget the writers. One of them, David Schmuller, worked on the screenplay for The Daytime Ended concurrently with feature directorial debut Tourist Trap. Trap was also produced by Charles Band, and the two men would reunite to create one of Band's most lucrative franchises when Schmuller directed The First Puppet Master in 1989.
Schmuller's best films were often shorts, including the fascinating documentary Please Kill Mr. Kinski. Spoiler alert, Klaus Kinski was a great actor and an awful man, as well as his thesis film The Spider Will Kill You, which was the basis for Tourist Trap. Oh, he also directed something called Spanking Lessons? If you've seen Spanking Lessons, please write into It's Just a Show, HOH Canada. We'd love to know if we've been doing it wrong.
Jonah the Boss make a lot of jokes about pizza delivery in this movie, which had become very much a staple of American life in the early 80s. The first recorded pizza delivery, not surprisingly though, happened in Naples, Italy. Legend had it that when King Umberto and Queen Margherita of Savoy visited the city in 1889, the Queen requested common food. The renowned Napoli pizza chef Raffaele Esposito was summoned to make the pies. And since he was dealing with royals, he transported the piping hot pizzas to the couple from his restaurant himself. Queen Margherita took one bite of the basil, mozzarella, and tomato creation and instantly called it one of the best dishes she'd ever eaten. Flattered, Esposito named the recipe after her.
Jonah chants, "Show me what you got," at a close-up of the sun, referencing the giant head aliens who love fresh beats on Rick and Morty. R&M's creators, Dan Harmon and Justin Roiland, wrote for the previous season of MST3K.
The peppy Stars and Stripes Forever song, which Jonah and the Bots sing over the climax of the Time Warp, is a very popular patriotic march written by composer John Philip Sousa. It would be hard to find a composer as enthusiastically patriotic as Sousa, who wrote 136 other marches that mostly have to do with how great the USA is. Titles of his marches include Hail to the Spirit of Liberty, Invincible Eagle, Glory of the Yankee Navy, and Liberty Bell. You know, the theme song of Monty Python's Flying Circus?
Crow reses Grant for not knowing where his key light is, shamelessly pandering to the lucrative lighting nerd market.
I don't know what place they're in.
Or where my key light is.
For civilians, key light, fill light, and backlight are crucial for lighting your subject and creating a depth of field. When lighting for film and television, the backlight separates your subject from the sets or background, while the key and fill lights paint how the subject looks with a balance of light and shadow. Key light is what you use to create shadows, while fill light is used to soften shadow, further refining the subject's appearance. A shame no one told the stop-motion animators about this.
Jonah makes a reference to black mold, the silent killer. Other things that have been called the silent killer include high blood pressure, carbon monoxide, hepatitis C, air pollution, pneumonia, cancer, diabetes, stress, crypto mining, obesity, money, and complacency. Can you think of any other silent killers, Adam?
Think of any others. The entire 80s slasher genre was founded on the silent killer. Also, that's time.
So, Adam, I decided to start a corner of my own, and this one is about architecture.
Ooh.
So, let's call it the Corner Corner. The Corner Corner. So, I was really struck by the main set piece of this movie, which is this strange little house in the middle of the desert. Because it gave me a lot of feelings about my own childhood and the kind of decor that was, de rigueur at the time. So at first it seems like a very futuristic house, right? It's like an octagonal house, which was also very much of the time. You had kind of the rise of geodesic domes in the 60s and 70s. Then you walk inside and it is pure 70s. Except for the fact that the walls are white, which reflects the fact that this is, a very southern design. You want to keep things light and cool. It's like walking into my childhood.
And that was definitely not a choice to highlight and make note of the fact that when they turn the green light on, you'll notice. Because if you have brown colored walls, the lights will look all weird.
Exactly. And we should say there were many different styles of the 70s, but I think the 70s that had the most bleed into suburban life was what we can maybe call the back to nature movement.
Does that have something to do with all those cartoons in which two naked characters hold hands and it says love is?
I'm sure that has part of it. It's basically, you can think of it as a reaction to the kind of day glow, plastic, fantastic colors of the 60s. It was also kind of a reaction to the energy crisis of the early 70s. So a lot of people were going through the kind of distrust of the infrastructure of the world in kind of a way that is similar to right now, where people were trying to go off the grid and become self-sustaining and kind of embracing a more backwoods lifestyle. And that was reflected in a decor that was very nature colored, burnt umber, browns, beiges, and was kind of focused more on texture than color and used a lot of natural materials. So kind of grasses and rattans and linens and things like that. And I don't know about you, but I had this house. The only difference was we had wood paneling, and the couch that I grew up with, I took to university with me, was one of those brown plaid couches that has a weave like a colander. It's so rough, and yet it stayed with me all that time. And so,
for your youth in Arizona,
indeed. So this particular look, I think, has had a lot of reaction, especially in the 90s, which makes sense. It's 20 years later, as just being the height of bad taste. They embrace kind of a folk art movement. So this is where you see on the walls of this house, there's a lot of simplistic terracotta and macrame, which is not a difficult art. And just, there's a little bit of simplicity and guilelessness built into the look of these places. So you can tell this suits the movie, because this family seems to have the intention of going off the grid and being isolated and just totally backcountrying it. So I have to ask, Adam, did you grow up with wood paneling like I did?
Yes. I mean, I was born in 83, so of course. There was wood paneling. There was horrible floral couches with a floral pattern that was, but the overall color of the couch was nonetheless brown. You had a television that was wood paneled. That was also brown. Everything was brown. Even the pink floor was brown.
Yeah, I mean, I think because trends tended to last longer, I think people were more willing to go all in on it. And so you would have an entire room, even an entire house, just completely buying into this whole aesthetic in a way that I think most people today would find overwhelming. But yeah, like I said, these elements of the 70s have come back and have had a renaissance. Certainly natural materials are back in. Wicker, that's another big one too. Those weird wicker chairs and sideboards, they're back, and everybody's nuts about plants now. Even I've seen some macrame, but I don't think we'll ever see that return to like woodsy cabin den where everything is brown, because it's got such a bad reaction. I have to say, I kind of like beige and I use a lot of it in my decor, but I know I have to be careful.
This is a much scarier story from the monster's perspective.
Monsters.
Your favorite.
Yes. They are not unlike you and me, Beth, and should be treated accordingly. Whether they be ghoulies, whether they be the puppets serving some kind of puppet master, whether they be the demonic toys, whether they be the demonic toys versus Dollman. They're all like us. So I imagine confronting strange creatures, I should say, as Grant's family does in this film, why, it's equally as terrifying for our pal, the giant monster who gets a pitchfork in his head for his troubles.
No, he gets a pitchfork softly placed onto the top of his head.
Mm-hmm. Yes, like he's a happy king.
Well, we've talked about kind of the evolution of monsterdom in Hollywood, where especially in the 50s, the monster movies are something that everybody fears, and but eventually the monster became more and more of a sympathetic creature until it became kind of the hero of the movie. And then you get things like The Shape of Water. But I have to admit, this monster did nothing for me.
Which one? Because remember that there's the monster that fights one monster, and then of course there's the little guy who does a little dance, and then there's the robo creatures who shoot bathroom doors.
Yeah. I think the most compelling was the Green Pyramid, if I'm being honest.
Oh man, all things serve.
At least it can take a good hug.
Oh.
No, it's just, and this is kind of triggered by Tom saying that this is a much scarier story for the monster's perspective. I don't believe that. I mean...
Oh, no?
Well, this is... I get the appeal to monsters, and I know that especially for certain individuals and communities who feel the outs, monster is a kind of automatic go-to for a sympathetic figure.
I think you're also forgetting that monsters are way cool.
But in this case, when it's just like a mindless brute, no, I don't feel a thing. It's hungry.
But that's way scarier. It's like an innocent animal.
So you felt sorry for the cave troll in the first Lord of the Rings movie.
Well, yeah, who am I going to root for in Lord of the Rings? Bunch of elves? Them.
They can walk on snow.
They can giant stupid feet. I hate them.
Especially these particular monsters, which are just like piles of moving clay. Like,
well, Beth, we're all jars of clay. Check your local Bible.
It just reminded me of that moment in The Grizzly Man with Herzog. He's trying to figure out what it is about these bears that give the man he's examining such a sense of bliss. And he just can't. He's like, he's looking at this footage of a grizzly playing or doing something in the water, which I forget the man's name, but he was waxing philosophical about it, and then Herzog says
Grizzly Adams.
Yeah, that's the name. And Herzog just kind of says, like, this thing clearly has no more than a quote half-bored interest in food. You are projecting way more onto this creature than it deserves, and that can be dangerous. And I'm not saying it's dangerous here, but I see no reason to feel sorry for this monster or when it gets pitchforked, because all it wants to do is eat and destroy. So it deserves a pitchfork in the head. Like, look at it this way. If you had a dog and the dog stuck its head in a hollow and gets pricked by a porcupine that's
oh yeah, I'd kill it instantly.
Side.
You're right.
No, you're like, well, serves you right for boring your head into a hollow where it didn't belong.
See, I think that with one, these are cool monsters. They don't want to destroy stuff. All the monster does is defend himself against another monster. And then he just tries to go into the nearest house where he sees people, and he just wants to hang out. He wants to have a Harry and the Henderson style relationship.
Oh, sure.
But that is thwarted by a pitchfork right in his noggin.
Okay, so why did the monster pursue the horse? Was the monster trying to make friends with the horse?
But it was trying to ride the horse because it saw the humans do it. And it looked like fun. If I were a monster, I would want to be like the human.
Yeah, see, like that, I have to admit, this is where I was just like, yeah, I don't know.
To live, to laugh, to love, Beth. Chris, it seems that time has ended for our discussion of the day time ended. Do you have one final factoid for us?
I don't, but I have one question for you guys as we see it off. In this episode, it was made canon that Kinga's mother is Kim Cattrall. Mm-hmm. Kim Cattrall has worked with MST3K before. She was at Convention Con Expo Festorama 2 back in the day. And I know you guys don't like the celebrity cameos that happened last season, season 11. But I feel like they're opening a door for a possible Kim Cattrall cameo in the future. Is that something you'd be at all excited about?
100% yes.
Absolutely, without question.
Because unlike Will Wheaton and What's-Her-Face from like Duck Dodgers or whatever the shit it was, Kim Cattrall has chops. Mm-hmm. Kim Cattrall is a solid comic actor. And in addition to being Canadian, in addition to being still cute as a button, she seems to have a real fondness for an appreciation of this show, as when Crow sang to Kim Cattrall on an earlier episode, Kim Cattrall sent him flowers, specifically Crow, not Trace Beaulieu.
Do you guys want to imagine how that scene would play out?
I imagine Kim Cattrall would be like Nora Charles in that she would be fast talking and not really paying attention to Kinga, and would be doing the dismissive, not giving you love thing that we also get from Pearl, but in a much more manic way.
I have to imagine it was probably planned and maybe they just couldn't get her. I have no idea what it would look like, but within the canon of what I've seen, maybe she'd just be a mannequin.
Or a mannequin too, on the move.
I like to imagine that this will happen when Trace finally agrees to reprise his role as Dr. Forrester. And
it'll never happen.
It may never happen, but I'd like to imagine that that's what they're waiting for. And then he gets to have a long moonlighting style 1.5-minute kiss with Kim Cattrall.
Oh, I thought you were going to say we're going to get our first MST3K episode with full frontal nudity.
That too.
I wonder if a kiss with Kim Cattrall might actually woo him back onto the show.
They don't call her Kiss Cattrall for nothing.
If you've been affected by the issues on this show, if you are also a little too fond of beige, or if you'd like to ask Beth and Adam anything, get in touch with us. Our website is itsjustashow.com, or we're on Twitter at itisjustashow. And yeah, we still have a Facebook group. You know how to find it. Either way, we'd love to hear from you. This show is made possible by listeners like you. You can support us and access some superfan bonus bits by going to itsjustashow.com/Patreon or patreon.com/itsjustashow. And if you want to follow up on anything that we mentioned today, you'll find links in our show notes at itsjustashow.com/episode/45.
That's enough Desertscape for one movie, I think. Do we have something a little bit more verdant on the hopper?
Well, it is the springtime of your life. Oh, time, time, time. See what's become of me. If you're lost, you can look, and you will find me time after time. And it's time that you love. And it's going to be a long time gone, because times is harder than ever been before. So hit me, baby, one more time. And let's do the time warp again with Season 8, Episode 21, Time Chasers.
I've never seen this one.
This one is one of the earliest DVD releases from back when MST3K was still released on Rhino Home Video.
Oh, interesting. I think I have seen this in a couple top tens.
Yeah, it's a fan favorite. It's an interesting episode, and it's got, I think, one of the best sketches of Season 8 at the very tippy top, but we'll get more into that next time on It's Just a Show.
And this is after the big plot sequence of Season 8 goes, so this isn't ruining our walk through Season 8.
Yes, and we weren't exactly dying to revisit those plot arcs.
Exactly.
So you're going to wait a while before you get 805, listeners.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, until next time.
Remember, all ghoulies are puppets, but not all puppets are ghoulies.
Well, now I really want to watch Herzog again. I'm going to go do that now. See you next time.
Great. Enjoy it. He dies. Take it away, Theme Squad.
No one should ever see this.